2007 Kia Sedona steering rack removal. First thing you do, remove some of the old fluid. Get the reservoir as empty as possible. Keep from making a mess if you don't get your buckets in the right place. Since you're going to be lowering the subframe from the vehicle, you do have to remove the bolt that holds this U-joint onto the steering spline, the pinion. So just remove the bolt and you can slide the U-joint off the pinion. Okay, but to make sure the steering wheel doesn't get turned too far and damage the clock spring inside, we're strapping the steering wheel down. Okay, that's a 12mm bolt under there. One bolt, okay? Of course, I assume you've already got it jacked up. Here's some things you need to remove. You need to remove the ball joint from the steering knuckle, the sway bar link pin from the top of the strut, and the tie rod. So when you lower this subframe, those things won't get hung up. This will just hang in space. Okay? Now, you'll do that to both sides, of course. On the passenger side, there's a low pressure power steering line. I've removed that and plugged it, let it drain for a while. I've just put this diaper on it to, if anything more drips out of it, there shouldn't really be anything left. Underneath the vehicle, in this case I've already got it mostly separated, but there's a bolt that goes through this bracket and holds this roll stop. Remove that so the roll stop will be able to drop out of place because it's bolted to the subframe. On the back side there's another roll stop. This one, getting the bolt out is really hard because you can't get in between the exhaust. So there's 4 bolts on the subframe, 4 19s. Take those off, and that'll allow the roll stop to just hang up there. On the front of the vehicle and the back, there's some big 19mm bolts with these braces. The 14mm on those braces, just lower those. Remove the 14mm completely and lower those. At this point, where you're at, don't take the bolts all the way out. You want to verify the steering rack actually starts to lower it a little bit. You're going to need jacks. In this case, I have a cooler holding up the front, and I have jacks holding up the rear. And the subframe is pretty heavy, about 90 pounds, so you don't want it to fall on you. When you start to lower it, try to do a little at a time, because it has these big pins on the frame. And if you get a weird angle on it and it's canted too far, it'll hang up. So you can put a little bit of pry bar on it, but try to lower it in 2-inch, maybe 1 or 2 inch increments at a time. Let's go see the back side. Okay, we're on the back side. Here's the subframe, mostly separated. We have to remove this rubber hanger from the exhaust because there's a hang pin right there on the subframe. We need those to separate, and that's the back of that roll stop. There's a steering line on it. We're going to remove that 10mm bolt and just separate those two so they don't drag on each other. At that point, we can lower the subframe a considerable amount, which is going to make it much easier to remove the remaining hydraulic lines. And I'll shoot this from the front in a little bit. If you try to remove the hydraulic lines while the subframe is pressed all the way up, there's no wrench space. It's ridiculous. So we're gonna loosen some of these bolts that have the steering lines hanging up on the subframe. So we want to be able to drop this thing down without ripping anything apart. You have to observe carefully. Those lines are delicate compared to these giant subframe pieces of steel. Okay, here we are with a couple more steering lines I just removed from the subframe. There's mounting bolts there, right there. One there, a little farther back. Now with this significantly lowered, we can get to the pressure lines on the rack itself. So we're going to remove those and let them drain. Here's a picture of the subframe being farther down. Shot from the passenger side. Steering line's down. So the whole subframe is just sitting on the jack at this point. Make sure it's not hanging up on anything in the back. Okay, here I am. 17 millimeter. This is a special wrench used for brake lines and hydraulic lines. It's called a flare wrench. So I can go over the brake line using just a regular open-end wrench. May strip these and you'll be in trouble. So get the right tool. I'm going to open both those and let them drain. Here we're actively draining these lines. Just let them sit. Got a nice tub underneath. Let that sit for a while. This stuff's nasty if you get it all over your driveway. Very hard to get off. So there we go. We'll let that sit for a while. Just about done with removing the rack. Okay, here's the subframe removed and the steering rack. A couple things on the steering rack. You're gonna have to mark the threads on those tie rods so you know how far to spin the new ones on. So just mark right behind the jam nut, and then when you set up the new ones on the new rack, try to position them the same way so the steering is aligned as much as possible. Take this dust cap off, separates from here. Don't forget to take this spline off. I'll show you that in a minute. It's actually a good time to inspect these subframe bushings. I'll show you how to do that. And also inspect the sway bar bushings because they're easy to get to now. For the subframe bushings, physically remove the caps. Look at them for seriously damaged rubber. Also, put in a pry bar in here and torque these as much as you can. These things should really be stiff. If they knock around, you need to replace them. They're about $50 to $70 a piece, depending upon where you get them. Okay, as far as the sway bar bushings, I already replaced these, sorry. No, they're good, but I did it while it was on the vehicle and it was very hard. There's no clearance. It took me a ridiculously long time. If I was doing them now, piece of cake. You might want to do them, just if you're not sure. These things were $12 for the sway bar bushings. So you can pry on them, see if they're bad. Underneath here, there's a important rubber rubber bushing. You better make sure you transport that, otherwise the rack will bang around in place. Not good. And you'll remove the heat shield and transport it. So we're going to strip this down. Go from there. Okay, we have the dust cap off with the bottom ring. And we have the spline extension removed. So when you look at this rack, make sure that's removed. I once did a rack and forgot to take that off and then put the new one on. And of course, it didn't fit in the vehicle correctly because I couldn't get the steering column down to it. Here, I've taken some little dab of white paint and marked the thread where the jam nut is. Same on the other side. Now I'm going to remove those. Next video will be just completed, and it's a complete reversal. Okay, I bought this steering rack online. Said it was brand new, and it comes in a box. Inside it says Hyundai remanufactured, and actually has the Hyundai Kia logo on it. So, but interestingly, compared to the other rack I had, comes with a brand new dust cap and a new spline. Also comes with the lock nuts, the jam nuts on the outer tie rods. Comes with a new bracket and a new bushing. And I paid less than the defective remanufactured one that I got from O'Reilly, which I'm reinstalling. This is a second time I'm doing this because the rack that I got from O'Reilly was actually defective. So this looks nice, although I'm kind of bummed because I paid $40 for a new one of these plastic caps because the other ones, the bushing was all ripped up. So this appears to be a good buy, although not exactly brand new. Not going to complain. Alright, so I've got the jacks back underneath this subframe. Pretty heavy doing it yourself. Just make sure these sway bar pins are on this side of the axle shaft over here. There's the axle. Otherwise, if it's on the other side and you put it up, you'll have to take it off from underneath it. It messes things up. So I'm going to slowly jack this thing up. I'm going to use the guide pins. There's a guide pin right there. Right there. And the ones in the back. But I also have to make sure that this dust cap heads up towards the frame correctly, towards the cabin. And got to be real careful. You don't want to damage anything. Nice and slow. Check it out frequently. Adjust the jack, shimmy it in there. Go from there. Now you don't want to get underneath this thing before the bolts are in. Those 19 mils in the frame. Unless you got really good jack stands and so forth. So what I did is basically jacked it up pretty level. And I put the fronts in a couple turns. And now I can lower the back just a little bit. It'll be in an angle, but as long as you don't jump on or anything, there's no chance of damage. And then you're going to hook up this other line right here. And then put the subframe back in. Don't get underneath that thing unless you're 100% sure you know what you're doing. Because it's very awkward. It's very big. Doing it by yourself is a challenge. Alright, the rack is completely back in. Everything's tight. Steering, suspension, all put back. Now we got to align the steering wheel inside. So, assuming you installed the tie rods at about the same thread turns as what came out of there, what you want to do now is find a fixed point on the chassis. I just use this nut and I go out to the rotor and I measure that it's 15.5 to the edge of the rotor. Now I've already aligned it. I did that on both sides, so that tells me that the steering wheel, the suspension alignment is good. It's close enough. Now that might be a little bit toe in, a little bit toe out. We'll let them do a front alignment to finish it. But what we need to do is make sure we're connecting the steering wheel on when the rack is straight. So it is now straight. I've checked this on both sides. 15.5. Okay, so as soon as we get this wheel straight, okay, this is better if you have two people. Want somebody to really hold it perfectly straight. You gotta come down here underneath the brake pedal. You're gonna put the steering column back onto the new pinion sticking through. So do that and get with the steering wheel straight. If you mess it up, you can always pull it over and fix it on a test drive. It's very easy to remove that. Alright, I just refilled the power steering fluid. I walked around, checked for leaks. There were none. Now I'm going to start it. Of course, it's going to make a lot of weird noise because there's no power steering fluid down in the rack yet or in the pump. So it's going to sound weird. This is very normal. Okay. Wow, the steering rack is really tight. Really tight. The new one I had put in before was so loose it sucked. This is it's feeling good. We'll let it run for a few minutes. Check for leaks. You're done. Go get a front alignment.
This is the 2007 Kia Sedona.